about the steps you went through and how they are very similar to what they are today, but they are different. And one of the major ways they're different is that most agencies in Washington State are using publicsafetytesting.com. And this is not a commercial for them, but if anyone's watching this and they are hoping to or preparing to be a police officer, it must be mentioned. And so as a police agency, this company, this service that they provide is hugely beneficial. Also for the candidate, because you mentioned having to travel over to Linwood and Pasco and Spokane and Seattle and Vancouver, all to take a test for each individual agency. And what public safety testing allows us to do is, as candidates, I can apply, or rather test for a dozen agencies, 20 agencies. There's a fee involved. But then once I take the test as a candidate once, they send my scores to all the places that I have requested they send my scores. And so as candidates, I can take a test once and apply at 20 places. Now I have to go to each of those agency websites or maybe individually to the physical building, but probably online, and actually apply. And then that marries the scores. But as a candidate, it's way more efficient. As an agency, it's taken the burden off of us as agencies to host these tests, which are also like hugely time consuming for an agency to plan an event for dozens, if not hundreds of candidates to come take a written test. We have to have a written test. We have to host a physical test. It just has taken all of those burdens off of us. And so there's probably other companies like it around the country. The one we're familiar with is public safety testing, and that's where people are going to apply for most larger agencies in Washington State. There are, still smaller agencies that are going to host their own tests because they're hiring way less frequency. Unlike where we work, where we're always hiring, we're always processing backgrounds and hiring new people. And so, I guess before we get into preparing for a public safety test, I think it's worth spending a little bit of time on how does an individual, so you had a path that was different than my path. I did part-time jobs and lived on my own and got hired at 21, finished my college degree later, started it early. You went to college, finished your degree, took that path. We took different paths. We both have had successful careers. I think it's worth pausing right here and talking about the variety of things someone can do to prepare themselves in life, both through high school, into college, whenever it is they decide they want to be a police officer. What sets them up for success at 21, 30 years old to be a police officer, to apply for the job and to be successful in the job?
The successful candidate has the ability to show how they have been able to set goals for themselves and attain those goals, whatever the goals may be. It's a long series of demonstrated ability to learn, and that plays out in the law enforcement career, because fast forward, you'll be doing a lot of learning and in critical times and under stress. So wherever you are at, be it the 15-year-old who's thinking about law enforcement, or the 25-year-old who maybe is like, hey, the career I started isn't the one I'm going to finish in. You have a path either ahead of you or you've been working on that you can demonstrate. I had this goal, and here's how I prepared for that goal, and here's how I either accomplish it or on the path to accomplishing it. Like we both, though we have different ways that we did it, that both comes down to the same result. At some point, we had plans and we were on that path until we chose to be off that path for an articulable reason why, and demonstrated how we are going to accomplish the next goal. Mm-hmm. We all have goals through life. We should continue to have goals through life. And the successful candidates are people that wherever they were at can demonstrate how they got there and where they're going. Not successful candidates don't have a future plan. They have no idea what is in store for the future. They can't articulate how they got where they were at or where they're going. And a good key way to measure future performance is past performance.
So one of the things so that's true. And so one of the things we see often is, especially recently, is very young people applying for police work. And that worked for us at 21. And we also see people coming in their 30s, and we see people coming in not much later than that, not with any regularity, but occasionally we see people coming in, late 30s and 40s, just not as common. And so usually we're seeing people in their 20s. And one of the things when people will ask as they're approaching 20 or they're thinking about a career in law enforcement, I say things like, well, stay out of trouble. And I mean that in the literal way where, we're not hiring convicted felons. We're not hiring people who've been arrested. Although we do have a phrase that goes, time heals some things. And so there are minor offenses that 5 years, 10 years can heal. But generally, when we're looking back through someone's background, we want to see 5 to 10 years of their nose is clean and they've stayed out of trouble. And so one example would be like someone's 21 and they get a DUI. And now they're 31, 32, and they're applying for cop work. That candidate is probably, if they've had 10 years without getting in any kind of trouble, they're probably going to get hired. Their time has healed that indiscretion. And so, but we say things like stay out of trouble kind of loosely. But on the other hand, I do like interviewing candidates in the final phase that have kind of lived through life, that have they're a little rough around the edges. And the way I explain that is, I don't mean like, they're getting in bar fights and things like that. I mean like they've lived, let's just say a candidate who's 30 and they've had, 3-4 speeding tickets over the last 10 years, and they held down a job for the last 10 years, but they whatever they're like, well, I used to race monster trucks and that didn't really work out, and then I went into welding as a private business or whatever, and they've kind of lived through life. I kind of like a candidate who has experienced life in that way. And here's why. So we're in the business of being in people's business, being on people's porch, being in people's living room, and introducing ourselves into their lives as sometimes unwanted life coaches, certainly as professional problem solvers. And I think when you've gone through things of your own, when you've lived some life, it's easier for you to have some perspective, to give some grace, or to push back on some nonsense when you've gone through stuff. I think back to when I was 21 and I'm baby-faced standing in someone's living room giving them marital advice, and I'm just this baby-faced kid, and how tough that can be for someone to take seriously, and how tough that is for new candidates. And so I like a candidate who's lived some life.
I think the key part with that is they've shown growth from it.
Yeah, right.
For sure. Mm-hmm. Right. A person who has made a series of mistakes is fine as long as they are minor mistakes. We're not talking felonious mistakes, and have shown some growth from it. I do get disheartened sometimes when I have to tell people that you're not going to qualify, that there are some ghosts in the past, or not too often or not too far path. Just recently, within the last month, I was at an event doing a recruiting function, and a person discussed how their DOC probation officer has encouraged them to become a police officer. And once they get done with their felony probation soon, they're going to work on their criminal justice degree right now. And then in a couple of years, they're going to apply to be a police officer. And in no uncertain terms, is that person ever going to be a police officer?
For the obvious reason that you're unlawful to possess a firearm, but also it shows a pattern of behavior that is undesirable.
Right. That's the two prongs that I'm getting to is people, because their path was, I'm going to get this felony expunged. I'm going to get my my firearm rights back, and which all possible things to do in the next decade.
Right.
But I'm talking to a 30-year-old who, and maybe when they're 60, this may be a reality for them. But I really felt bad because just beaming ear to ear. This is what I want to do. And we're in a field that isn't just a job. It is a career level field. It's a career. And to look at somebody and say, you're not going to ever be in this career. It's tough.
Yeah. So one of the things that comes up now, and this is probably not for this podcast, is recreational drug use has changed since you and I got hired. And I think that in Washington State especially, this is not settled science. I think you get a diverse viewpoint, agency to agency maybe, on recreational marijuana use and getting hired as a police officer. And that's just something for, I guess, I just throw that out there as something candidates should be aware of, that if you were using recreational marijuana 15 minutes before your written test or 3 days before your written test, that's probably coming up in your background. And like I said, it's not settled science, and I'm sure there's case law to be coming out, but it is something that's going to be tricky to navigate, even in today's day and age.
Well, yeah, what I tell people, and raising a child of my own, is do things that will increase your likelihood of employment, not decrease.
Right.
The marijuana stance has changed wildly in the last my career, 28 years, but still comes down to set yourself up for success. If you are drinking heavily right now, that's not going to lead to better chances of being a police officer, because we're going to ask about not just drug use, we're going to ask about alcohol use, we're going to ask about a myriad of things. Just do things that will make it binary for yourself. Is this going to lead to a better chance, or this is going to maybe impede my chance of getting this career?
Yeah, that's good advice. Now, hard drugs, fentanyl, methamphetamine, cocaine, heroin.
Hard pass.
These are automatic failures. And so these are going to be an automatic disqualifier. If you make it to the background phase, that's going to come out, and not just in a drug screen. It's going to come out in the polygraph, or it's going to come out in the background interview. And candidates should just know that those are automatic disqualifier.
Yeah, what has caught some people too, especially some of the athletes that come through, the steroids as well have been a disqualifier, which kind of catches them off guard, because the social perception of those isn't that, they're a felony drug offense.
Yeah.
And it kind of can catch some people.
You know what? Another one that catches people, and it actually surprises them, and it's going to surprise some of the people that are watching, guaranteed. And that is, if I have a prescription for something and you come over and don't feel well and I offer it to you, this is delivery of a controlled substance. And it seems innocent because I just have some, I don't fill a lot of prescriptions. Let's just say I have some prescription ibuprofen and I give you one. That is delivery of a controlled substance by definition. And I've seen that trip people up in the background process. If you have a prescription, keep it to yourself. And the flip of it, if your buddy offers you a prescription, hey, you got a headache? Here, I have this stuff. I still have some. That's going to come up too. Have you ever taken a prescription medication that was not prescribed to you? Now that immediately you think, oh no, am I buying prescription pills off the street? No. Have you ever had a buddy go, oh, you have a headache? Here, I have some of these extra. It's the same, technically speaking, and it'll trip you up.
Part of my career, I spent almost 10 years in narcotics. Wasn't a path I chose or thought I would ever do, and then got to this job about 2 seconds, went, drugs drive crime. But you don't know what you don't know. And I remember getting introduced to drug laws as a young cop and realizing this delivery portion is transferring control of a drug. And I thought, oh my gosh, my grandmother is the biggest drug dealer I ever knew. Now, she never sold anybody drugs. But if you said, oh, my back hurts, or I have a headache, Grandma always had something. And I don't remember taking anything from her, because my parents are like, don't take anything from Grandma. But gosh, she was always like this pill pusher for whatever it was. So if you're watching out there, kids, don't take other people's drugs.
And I didn't expect us to go down this rabbit hole, but another thing that has been coming up more and more is psychedelic mushrooms. Like, I think people don't really realize that this could be an illicit substance. And it will, when you get to the part about have you taken hallucinogens in the past X number, whatever months, and you say, oh yeah, well, innocently, yeah, I took these mushrooms at a whatever, then that's going to be a problem. Which reminds me, I was in my 20s. No, scratch that, because I wasn't a cop yet. I was in my late teens. I was living alone, or I was living in with a roommate, and I come home one day and we had a friend. He was over and he's like sitting in the chair in the living room. This was a quaint place, very little furnishings. And I passed by as without even so much as a greeting. Maybe I gave a hello, but like 1,000-yard stare. Like, that's weird. So I go, changed my clothes or did whatever, dropped my backpack, whatever. I came back and I sat down. And I look over and I said, hey, what's going on? And I get like this really slow. You know those mushrooms in the horse barn? And I said, yeah. And he says, I ate some. And I said, you're going to die. And so I sat there for the next however many hours while he did not die. And he had what looked like just the most unpleasant trip with horse barn mushrooms. So later, a mutual friend of ours who was sort of a hippie said, no, that's not, you're not supposed to just eat wet mushrooms off the horse barn floor. There's a different way to do it. Never tried it, so I don't know, but he did it wrong. He did not die. But that's my rabbit hole from hallucinogens. So you talk about, learning from mistakes, showing growth, putting time distance between you and mistakes, showing that you're on the right path. And for a lot of ways, as someone at 21, it's a lot easier so long as you kept your nose clean in your late teens and early 20s, because it's easier to have a clean background than someone who's had a divorce and they're 35. And so